with anything to do with like conditionality, dispositional, like there, anything to do with any sort of status of alt or counterclaims, you definitely want to make sure we talk about in the next couple hours.
Wait, just counterclaims?
What's that?
Just counterclaims?
Counterclaims, K-alts, I mean anything that has to do with sort of the status or advocacy of one of those issues. And I want to make sure, we're going to make a real quick list, and we'll go through what we're going to go through, and then we'll make sure we cover everything you guys want to hear about. So, what's on your minds? You guys seem really excited. One of these chewing on your computer, this guy's about to fall asleep. Yeah?
I have no idea what like dispositional is in the comment 10.
Sweet. All right, we'll definitely cover dispositionality, but I'll put it on the list. What else? Theory's complicated. Theory can be crazy. You can come up with all kinds of stuff. I bet a lot of you don't have a lot of experience debating theory. And if that's the case, ask any question about learn it. I promise we will not make fun of you while you're in the room. Okay, good. Get back here. We'll go. Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's not really specific, but like maybe like a laundry list of all the different theory arguments there are, because like, or condensed list.
Oh, I just want to make sure I understand. Like, a laundry list of every kind of theory argument?
No, not like that. Like, it's like when you're arguing like picks bad, like the standards, like what kind of things you
want like the highlights of the best
yeah.
sets of arguments. We're definitely going to cover that, but we'll do
Greatest hits.
yeah, greatest hits. Sure, Mike. Sure, Mike. Yeah. Okay.
Like how would you argue or justify you fiating a theory attitude against alternative?
Explain what you mean. Fiating an attitude. Explain what you mean.
Well,
it was in the lecture.
We're going to have a fiat discussion tomorrow at one of the theory groups tomorrow. So.
All right, hold on to that question. Here in the back.
Oh, I was going to say neg fiat, but if we're going to cover that.
Yeah, we'll cover negative and no negative fiat tomorrow. Yeah.
Alternate fiat argument.
Okay. Lots of letters. Excellent hates letters. Well, come on. I've seen some of you all debate, and I know the exact questions. Yeah.
About like the role of evidence. In the lecture that he said something about
Evidence.
Okay. These are all kind of interesting questions. Kinda. Yeah.
Maybe when you go forward in the 2AR stuff that a lot of people don't do that they should.
2AR tricks. That's a great one for sure.
Yeah.
Anything else? Both of us are affirmative hacks. So. Although I bet we break down differently as this, but part of me being an affirmative hack means that I error negative on almost all theory issues. I think apps are whiny.
Yeah, I hear yeah.
Anything else we would definitely want to cover? Yeah.
Reciprocal theory.
Reciprocity. Big fan of this actually.
How to properly like overview theory, because like I tend to just ramble when it comes to like
How to debate.
how to debate.
Yeah, we'll definitely gonna cover some strategies for debate.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. One thing we're not going to do for the next 2 hours, because it will be painful for all of you, mostly for us, but also for you, is lecture. We're not really going to do that. This is going to be discussions. We're going to try and introduce some of the ideas, give you background for it, and what we're going to. The goal is going to be for us to generate together lists of reasons why things are good or bad for debate, and what those sort of things mean. Here's a couple opening remarks about theory in general. First of all, as much as I kind of hate it, I also love it, because it's a way to win any debate. In the same way you hear, like topicality. I always have a topicality argument, because when all else fails, you can go for T, and it's a winner. If all else fails, you can go for theory, and it's always a way to win the debate. It's also an enormous, especially if you're affirmative, it's an enormous time suck for the negative. We'll talk more about this in a second, but think about this. If I in the 2AC spend 5 seconds saying that conditionality is bad, and arguing that it's a voting issue, which I can do in 5 seconds, I can do in 5 seconds slowly.
Yeah.
That's going to suck up about 30 seconds at a minimum of the negatives time. And the 1AR gets to make all the new arguments eventually anyway, because the negative is going to laundry list all the reasons that, like, say, condo is okay. So it's sort of a no threat, no risk issue always for the affirmative that gives you an opportunity to win.
Just like topicality is for the negative, where you can just not answer any F argument on T when you pick out of it. Just don't have to talk about it. The same goes for theory. It's short, it requires a bunch of negative time investment, and you can use that time trade-off to do other things.
The other thing that, what's up?
You said that you didn't have to respond to it. It was, never mind, it was sarcastic.
Okay, fair enough. Well done. Nixon does like sarcasm. Anyway, the other thing I was going to say about it is one of the cool things about debate is about debate in general is that there aren't really any rules. What are some of the basic rules of debate? Assumptions that norms that we'll live by in debate. Things that like we just don't think are immutable truths of debate. Yeah.
Nice, not being like extremely like rude.
Okay, there's an element of decorum to it. We should engage other as intellectuals. I don't disagree with that here in the blue.
I was gonna say like speech times, like.
Yeah, speech time is one of them. That's pretty much a hard and fast rule. Very rarely will a judge decide that there should be a 3 and R. You know why judges don't do that? Because deep down we all hate debaters and we don't want to listen to you talk anymore. I'm kidding. Because there's no real good reason for that to happen. Yeah, you're right. Speech times are pretty much an immutable truth of debate right here.
Disclosure?
Disclosure. It's pretty round. I mean, some places, if you ask like UIL circuits, they don't disclose.
Some places don't disclose. If you're reading a new app, you
Yeah,
don't disclose. Also, you don't have to disclose.
No, it could be new.
You can also just say no if you want to be known.
You want people to hate you and punch you and hide. Yeah.
There'll be a resolution, some topic, greater topic, but not always followed.
Yeah, that's true.
The resolution will exist.
There will be a question that we're debating. That's one of the beautiful truths of debate. Things that happen in and around, things that are like unique to the debate. Is there anything else about this? I kind of think that there are only 2. I hadn't really thought about resolution. I see this kind of a prior question, but we'll include it. I think to me there are only 2 rules. You want to get the last one?
Oh, like one side's affirmative, one side's negative.
And there's something else connected to
Is
that.
it judge? I don't know. Maybe.
I'll say it's ask speaks first and last.
Oh, okay.
The speech orders are pretty much sacred, right? We don't really mess with the speech order. I don't know that someone could make even a very good argument for what speech orders can change, should change, concede it, and then I would suddenly decide that speech orders should be different, right? But the cool thing about debate is outside these things, time limits, the resolutional question, which we sometimes ignore, often ignore, and ask speaking first and last, every rule that we have in debate is something that is itself debatable. It's immutable. It changes all the time. And there are trends, and as trends in argumentation change, and we change what we think about those things. When I first started debating in college back in the early 1890s, the idea that something might be conditional was the worst thing ever.
Dysentery or something.
Yeah, most of the people I debated with died of tuberculosis. The rest of us ate ourselves on our way to the Northwest Passage. But the idea that conditionality was acceptable or all right, even uttering the word would be like, Dan kind of said it today, talking about that team from Kentucky, that this all in, conditionality is bad, it's evil, it's the worst thing ever, etc., etc. And the only way counterplans were ever presented were dispositional. And even that was a little bit sketchy, right? And now, in the last 5 to 10 years, I'd say, like 5 or so years, like conditionality is the standard for which everything is. We've accepted that conditionality is all right. We'll talk about what all that means, of course. And then it sort of changes. So one of the cool things is all these rules are debatable. There's nothing that we can't decide the rules of based on the game. So the question is overall is like, what's best for the game? That's all theory is asking. It's like, what is the best way for us to interpret the game that we're playing so that the game is fair and educational? And those might be, I think Dan kind of suggested this too, the 2 main impacts of theory debates overall. Anything to add here about why you love theory?
I think theory debates can be really interesting, and I think they're often done poorly, which is why a lot of judges dislike judging theory debates. No judge sits down in a round and he's like, I really hope this is a big 7, it's good and bad throwdown. That's what I want to hear. But it's an interesting topic. Like Scott said, you get to debate about the rules of the game, and it's cool that you get to shape the game that you play. So, but do it well. Don't.
Lost my lid. Nixon lost his lid. Alright, so let's just start with some of the basic things here. We'll try our best to be organized, but I could just prepare. There'll be some rambling to this overall. How many of you think you can provide a working definition of conditionality?
1 of you, 2 of you.
That's totally cool. Is it more of you just not raising your hands?
The ability to kick out of an argument.
That's part of it. Anybody want to finish that? Is there any more to it? You're not wrong at all.
The ability to run multiple arguments, inevitability to kick out of them.
Inevitability to kick out of them. There's something we're missing. Can I kick out of a dispositional counterclaim?
Sure, well, yeah, understand.
There you go. So there's some caveat we're missing to this for conditionality. Say your last names. It sounds awesome.
Impulsory.
Oh yeah, cool.
Kick out
Go
at
on.
any time.
What's that?
Kick out at any stage.
Kick out at any time.
Jerry, what did you say about dispositionality? You can
That-
kick out of it.
In certain situations, under
Yeah.
certain circumstances.
I think one thing to add about conditionality that kind of ties it into it, the status of a counterplan, you're talking about under what conditions you can kick the counterplan. So you can kick out of it any time. Under every condition, you can always kick out of the counterplan.
So let's say I wrote a disadd to the counterclaim. Does that matter?
No.
The negative? No, the negative's going to kick out of it anytime they want to. Let's say that well, here's an interesting question we'll get to in a second. But let's say I win that conditionality is bad. Counterclaim go away?
No.
Why not?
That means that.
That might be a reason why you keep it around, right? That's always been strange to me that if we win the conditionality is bad, the counterclaim goes away. But what we were trying to do is keep you kicking the counterclaim. We'll get to that in a second. All right, so let's imagine let's imagine for a second some of the reasons that like a negative might be down with conditionality.
Hold on one sec.
Yeah.
Is that like legitimate? Like you
Yeah.
can have a dispositional counterplan that kicks out if you lose on conditionality, like,
You can have a conditional counterplan.
or a dispositional counterplan that kicks out if we wait. Never mind.
If your counterplan is dispositional, it'd be really tough for you to lose on the condition.
No, sorry, dispositionality. Let's say that.
If you lose, the dispositionality is bad.
Yeah.
And it's off.
I mean, the negative is going to make the argument that you make when you're not negative always is to reject the argument, not the team, right? Some people will just not answer that. Just kick the counterplan. You have the app, right?
Yeah.
Kick out of it. Dan already talked about why that doesn't really make sense earlier in his lecture. We'll get to that a little bit later too. So.
All right, so you're negative, you got a conditional counterplan, you decided that means that there is no such circumstance where you can't just kick the counterplan. What are some reasons why that's a good interpretation? Yeah.
Real world, like, we get to choose the best one. We can decide which policy options. Right?
That is best policy option. I'm going to go ahead and spell policy correctly. There's no reason. Nixon hates letters. What's best policy option mean? Think through this for a second. If you said it was most real world, what do you mean by that?
That, like, in the real world, we would debate like which policy option is better, so we should be able to kick out of it because if we think that the counterplan is bad, we shouldn't advocate it.
Right. If we're in a room discussing intellectually what the best thing for us to do is, and we have a bunch of different options, and you've got reasons why my option is bad, it's not like I'm stuck defending it for any particular reason. It's a bad idea, it goes away. Right? In the back, Puma, you had your hand up.
I was gonna say the same, just what you just said. Like if in the real world, that's what it's like. We have the option to drop it if it's a bad idea.
If it's a bad idea, why would we continue to go for it? Exactly. Okay, what are some other reasons it's good? Come on, kids.
We talked about it in lab, so some people should be raising their hands. Jazz.
Yeah.
Because it's like key to like negative flexibility. Like instead of just reading the same disads, we can like read a counterplan or critique and stuff.
It's not just that you need to have yeah, that's one of the reasons. There are lots of layers to negative flexibility, right?
Yeah.
I missed what you said, sorry. More equals better. Before we get into that one, let's talk about keep talking about negative flex for a second. What are some reasons why the negative requires that kind of flexibility? Yeah. Either one of you guys go back.
Okay, well, because like it's like key to offset like the affirmative, because like they have like infinite prep and stuff, and like they speak first and last. Like the negative needs some like options to like make they need ground to like make the debate fair and stuff. I don't know.
Here's another way to think about this. What is it the negative's job to do in the debate?
Test the affirmative, like if the affirmative plan is good or not.
Yeah, they have to test the affirmative, right? So why would you hamstring them in their ability to test the affirmative?
There's an element of negation theory to this overall. At the end of the day, that all the negative has to say is no. If the negative wins at the after the bad idea for any particular reason, then you should vote negative, right? And so counterplans are key for us testing all the different ways the affirmative might be a bad idea, or that there might be a better idea than the affirmative overall. You guys are sneaky today. Someone said breast over death. What do you mean? What's wrong? What's that mean?
Like, it's better when we learn about like, different things than talking about one thing and yet.
Why? Learn about one thing in depth and a lot about that. Why is it better to learn about a bunch of other different stuff?
That's gives more education.
Why?
It is more educated. I mean, you're making the argument. We're just trying to get you to get to a war.
So you just don't learn about like whatever this has you want to learn about like cap and order this has instead of just like learning about the order this has to it.
Yeah.
This position.
Yeah. You get to have different debates that don't become stale.
All right. What are some other reasons? These two are defensive. We'll say. We have an argument here that's kind of offensive. And there's actually, you realize that there's also, somebody asked about reading cards in the debate, and I'll say one thing about the breadth over depth discussion. There's a lot of psychological literature that talks about the question of how much we learn and how much faster we learn when we think about things multidimensionally.
People who write about information processing and stuff, a lot of that can be used here.
Another thing that relates to this is, one thing debaters have been doing a lot more of, we've been doing in workplaces a lot more of, is using multiple monitors as they work, because they find that having multiple things reading and going on at the same time increases our retention, means that we learn faster, we process faster, we ultimately are able to regurgitate that information in a more efficient and effective way. That kind of relates to the question of counterplans as well. The more ways the app has to think about the dimensions of the affirmative and the implications of policy, the more likely they are to learn, not just about the policies themselves, but learning a way of thinking that makes us more effective as advocates overall. So if you've got to think about things multidimensionally, you've got more going on. So that's one reason that's going on. This is also a reason, I'll put parenthetically here, multiple worlds. Someone asked about this as well. Multiple worlds are good. All right, what are some other reasons condo is good? Yeah?
Because like the AF can kick out of advantages.
It's a word for that. It's reciprocal. Now, I do want to have a caveat to this question.
Can the
Yeah.
app conditionally kick out of advantages?
I'm not even exactly sure what that would mean.
Yeah.
I mean, like if they have, if the negative puts offense on it, they shouldn't kick out. I mean, they should at least answer it. But
If you read a hedge advantage and all the next says is hedge bad, can you kick out of that?
no. But like if the arguments are like strictly defensive, they could like kick out of it. Though.
Yeah, but here's one difference about this. And this is one thing that really separates conditionality from what we'll talk about next, which is dispositionality. Is that there doesn't have to be if you're kicking out of your advantage, like you just said, you concede an argument, right? You concede no impact to the advantage, and you can't solve it, and now the advantage goes away, right? Now, that's not the same as conditionality, because in the condo debate, you can functionally just go to the counterplan and say, not going for it. It goes away. Don't care what you said. And the only part of that you would have to answer, the only half argument against the counterclaim you really have to answer in that world is the one that challenges the legitimacy of the status of the counterclaim. So if they say condo is bad, they're saying you don't get to kick out of it any time, right?
Yeah.
Then you can do it. But half advantages aren't conditional. You said they were, but I think you want to be careful there. Because someone impact turns your advantage, you can't just say, oh, dude, we had not thought of that. Sweet, we're kicking out of it. Never mind. Because we'll just go for the impact turn. Yeah.
Well, if they just like, if the only thing they say is like hedge bad or like the impact trade, can you just say like, can you read like two cards that say like say we don't solve for hedge and then you just kick out? Can you?
Not allowed to contradict yourself.
Okay.
I mean, you could give that a shot. Like I said, it doesn't violate either of the two rules we said, but most judges are going to enforce that if the negative's on the ball. And,
Yeah.
It's like Julie.
so here in the front, is your hand up or you just? I don't know anybody's names. So. Hey, you don't have to go. Hey, you.
So if you claim your counterplan is conditional, you can only drop it when there's no offense.
Negative. False.
You can just drop
Conditional,
it.
you can drop it with everyone.
So it doesn't mean the offense doesn't even matter if you just drop it. So they
Well,
can't go
it
for the
does.
offense on that
So
foot.
there's no.
When we start talking in a second about how to answer conditional counterclaims, we'll talk about the difference between reading add-ons versus reading disadds as a counterclaim, which is a better place for the app to be. All right, get back. Puma.
Don't you still want to answer the perms on the counterplan even?
Wow. Well,
We can have that discussion a little bit later.
let's talk about advocating for add that to our list.
Advocating.
Oh yeah.
Because like, wouldn't that mean the app gets the net benefits from the counterplan or whatever?
Well, there's a debate about whether or not you can advocate the permutation.
And whether our conditionality might justify you doing that, but we're not quite there yet. There's that's a possible and interesting argument, possible argument to make, interesting debate to have. Yeah. What are some other offensive reasons why conditionality is okay, just generally? Hey, Colin, what's the other argument for why conditionality is okay?
It's 2AC critical thinking.
Yeah.
Has anyone heard this argument before? Want to explain it?
Basically, 2AC more.
Hmm?
It creates a better competition for 2AC. It allows 2AC to think more.
Why?
Because they have to think about like more than one thing.
Well, yeah.
What's the more than one thing they have to think about? Let's say I have just one conditional counterpoint. How does critical thinking an offensive argument for you? You're right. I just want you to say why.
Like if it's just the counterpoint, then you only have to like think an answer to the counterpoint. Like it's just if you're conditional, there's more than one off. You have to think about it. You have to think about something for the right club. So I guess it's just
You're almost there. So how about this? One world. Every counterpoint is added creates another world the app has to debate in, right? They have to debate the counterpoint. They have to debate it versus what?
What are the worlds that the app has to debate against?
Versus the status quo. Versus the net benefit. Versus a world where the net benefit links to the app even if there's no counterplan. So it's squo versus plan. And it's squo plus disadd versus the plan. Or the counterplan versus the squo. Those are all different levels that the app has to compute in the 2AC and decide how they're going to set up their answers so that they can win even if the counterplan goes away. And you know, if the counterplan is conditional, that there's always a risk that the counterplan would go away. What if we add a wrinkle to this? I think we're kind of thinking about this in terms of having one counterplan. What if there's multiple conditional advocacies in the debate? Is that good? Are there any reasons why that might be good? Does it supercharge any of these things? Blue Man Group.
Yeah, the reason it's good is because you make the app think more and have to give more responses on what the app is good.
Yeah, it's critical thinking. And you said something else that kind of relates to all this, which is that conditionality might require the app to, another layer of critical thinking is that they have to decide in the 2AC what their best answers to the counterplan are and make those. There's a disincentive to make to flack a conditional counterplan with like a bunch of like silly answers or things that are just not the best args. Not only against the counterplan, but against the other arguments in the debate as well, because obviously the conditional counterplan takes the 2AC time to answer, and there's no risk for the negative, because they can kick it. So if I read a disadd to the counterplan, and the counterplan's a bad idea, the negative might just say, counterplan goes away. So I don't have there's not a good reason for the affirmative, the app to read a disadd to the counterplan, or conditional, like the counterplan causes X to happen or whatever, because they're going to kick the counterplan if they do that. That I have to make offensive arguments to the counterplan to keep the neg from just being able to have it beat the app means that I have to make fewer answers other places, which creates an incentive for the affirmative to make their best answers on every piece of paper. Yeah?
Question. So would you recommend that you run a disadd for the counterplan to make them get out of it if you know that if you run a DA on it, they're going to concede it, and then you'll win the case, and they won't, so you'll outweigh.
Well, this is the reason why it's good for critical thinking, is because that's a decision you have to make round to round. It would be harder for you to win that the case outweighs the disadd if you have to spend time on the counterplan reading a disadd to the counterplan, right? Because you only have 8 minutes. So if you have time to read it, and it'll force you to kick out of it. That's a strategic choice you can make. But if it would prevent you from doing something else, then you have to make the choice not to.
Does that make sense to you? It's also a reason, we'll just talk about it here real quick. Reading a disadd to the counterplan, like saying something about the mechanism of the counterplan is uniquely bad, right? That isn't something necessarily the app can solve, but it's just a disadd to the counterplan, is almost universally a waste of time for the affirmative unless you are absolutely and totally job. A better approach for the affirmative to take this is to figure out what the difference between the app mechanism and the negative mechanism is, and read add-ons that the app can solve that the counterplan can't. So now, if the neg wants to kick out of the counterplan, they at least have to answer my add-on advantages.
Yeah.
I still get offense from that.
The cool thing you can do with that is call them turns.
Yeah.
Like it's an Iran add-on, you'd be like, turn, Iran, and then they might think it's a disadd to the counterplan, kick out of it, and be like, we don't have to answer your disadd, and the one AR can be like, ha, drop the add-on.
Yeah. People don't want to go for it. Like, oh, there was a lot of O. Screw it, we'll kick out of it.
Yeah.
Tricky. All right, so what if I have multiple counterplans? Or let's say I have a counterplan that's conditional and a critique alternative that I want to say is conditional as well. How does that interact with some of these arguments? Are there any new reasons why that's good? Multiple conditional worlds. So I have a K, and a K output's conditional, and I have a counterplan that's conditional. How do you think that interacts with some of the arguments we've got here for why conditionality is good? Right here.
Well, it's more real world, because if you thought both the CP and the alt could solve in the real world, there's no reason we wouldn't talk about both of them.
Yeah, there's no reason we wouldn't make those ideas compete intellectually to which one's better. So, this argument still applies. What are some reasons, maybe some offensive reasons why it's good? Yeah, Louis.
It makes them think more critically, because not only do they have to answer a counterplan, DA, now they have to allot time within their affirmative speaking time to address each thing and address it to a point where they don't lose it but still win it.
Yeah, you actually said that really, really well. Yeah, it supercharges critical thinking arguments. Think about it this way. If it's good to learn about 2 things, it's good to learn about 4 things, right? It's good to learn about 8 things.
Yes. No bad at that point.
Emphatic.
Yeah.
I like it. Thank you. That is true. It is good to learn about more. This is a big part of the debate overall. Let me ask you guys just generally. If I win that these things are true, especially some of these arguments down here, like critical thinking, right? If I win that that's true and conditionality is good, what is the logical limit on how much conditionality is good?
There isn't one.
Wow. Mind blown, yeah.
To a certain point, you can't run 8 different counterplans.
Why not?
The app will make the argument of time suck. You're just doing it to try and make us not answer.
I have 8 very good ideas.
Yeah, also if you, presumably you're winning these arguments to answer time stuff, right?
These are all, actually this argument is the reason why it's not a time suck. We're searching for the best policy option. We need to have those time sucks to test,
Critical thinking is an impact term to time suck.
Yeah. It's not a time suck, it makes you think harder. Is there a limit on it?
No, there isn't a limit on VI.
And this,
Right.
well, we're going to disagree tomorrow, you and me, boy. But as a judge, I can say I am fairly compelled by the argument, even though I'm sort of an app hack, that if they win that conditionality is good, I don't know what the logical limit on conditionality is. The limit on conditionality becomes what is not bad, when it becomes another 8 counterplans become bad for the app or not. The question is what's sustainable for the negative. What limits it is strategy. Who reads 55 counterplans? I mean, the app can lie if that is possible, but no one's going to do it because they wouldn't have anything else to say in the debate. And if I win one argument, which is cognitive is bad, all those counterplans are in trouble anyway, right?
Yeah.
So that's why apps don't do it here in New York City. You had your hand up. He's like, what am I worried? You had your hand up.
No, Aeropostale had his hand up.
Aeropostale, yeah.
I was gonna say, for the app, you could argue that it makes the neg a moving target. You don't know what they're gonna say in the last speech. And they could just suddenly go for one and drop all 8 of the counterplans.
All right, well, let's switch over then for a second and start to talk about some of the reasons that the app might say that. One is that it's a moving target. What does that mean exactly? What do you say?
They could drop everything just without one in the last 2 in the 2 and 1. So you don't know what they're gonna try to go for. So it's strategy skew, I guess.
Okay, so it's a strategy skew. Can anybody think about maybe a better way to say strategy skew, or a specific example of the kind of strategy skew that it is? I'll add the strat skew. It's not wrong again. That's going to be okay. What are some ways it skews app strategy?
It just makes you like, when you focus on one thing, it makes you like go for the thing that you want to know. But regardless if it's like a good argument or not.
Yeah, kind of forces debates that are maybe anti-educational because they come down to coverage less than they do about actually testing ideas. That's a fair answer. What else?
Scott was just talking about one earlier, about what answers you should read to counterpoints.
Well,
Pepsi.
oh, I was just saying like it sort of like for an app answers it like punishes the app for making good arguments because like the best arguments that they make in the counterplan, like one counterplan, they'll just like kick that counterplan and go for like the one that maybe they didn't have the best evidence on.
Let's say it nullifies the offense. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess.
It makes a world where the app can't read offense to counterplay. That argument, we'll talk about any answers to these things in a second. So the strategy skew puts so coverage. I guess we'll put offense as one of these things too. No offense is an element of strategy skew. Because if I make offensive arguments, the counterplay will just go away. Any other reasons it's bad? Watch this. Hey, Colin, what are some reasons why Christian Allen is out?
Well,
Asking someone who does not like it.
I think that dissets to counterplans, it disincentivizes people from reading their best dissets to counterplans, right? Like Scott said, if you read a dissent to the counterplan, you spend a bunch of time, like however much time it takes you to read 2 or 3 cards that are dissent to a counterplan, and the counterplan can just go away. Why would you then read that? Yeah.
Why don't we just do what you said, read the add-on takes turns, and then
Yeah.
if they kick out, then...
Yeah, you would read an add-on, you would not read a dissent to the counterplan. But it would be good to learn about all the dissents to the counterplan. If you're trying to figure out what the best policy option is, why shouldn't we have a debate about these dissents to the counterplans?
If it disincentivizes research, definitely intersects with some of these things over here, like critical thinking.
Definitely, right?
Yeah, the depth is better. We got depth breath guy here. Depth is better. What are some reasons why that might be true? One is that we learn more.
So we get like more education on one topic and just get a little bit of education on like a bunch of different things.
Yeah, I mean, it's better to know a lot about something and a little bit about everything is sort of the argument. Again, there's lots of studies on this question overall. Any other reasons why depth might be better? Yeah.
Because we can have more in-depth thinking about a certain issue rather than having like spread out topics and putting like very, very generic and skewed answers on them.
Yeah, it's better critical thinking. It's a question of magnitude of critical thinking. Sure, it's one thing to think multidimensionally, but if depth is good, we have to think critically about multiple things as well, but just in more depth overall. So we're learning more generally. What are some other reasons why? How about some of this? What are some common interpretations? And I'll digress here for just a second and say, one way to think about all these theory debates is think of it like top cow. At the end of the day, we're debating about who has the better interpretation for how to debate. Remember we said that at the very beginning. Who's got the best interpretation for how the rules of the game should be played. So you have to have, it really is an issue of competing interpretations. Over here, on the extreme end of it, is a negative interpretation that as many counterpoints as we can get away with are good. There should be no limits on how many that we read. What are some common interpretations you hear from the affirmative? Anyway, opposite. Yeah.
Well, the app only gets one advocacy, so it's,
So the negative should be limited to one conditional advocacy?
yeah, so also it's
Yeah. Now, I like what you're thinking. So one conditional advocacy is reciprocal, right? Is your argument. We'll play this game, negative. If you think about this in a way, if this is your interpretation of fiat, right? And we're debating in a world where it's competing interpretations, and these are reasons to prefer conditionality, right? Some of these arguments you're making up here kind of